Ward, who is based at the London School of Economics. He's the Policy and Communications Director at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. Good to have you on the program with us. These are some of the world's wealthiest nations that are getting hit with these devastating floods. On top of that, we've seen extreme heat and wildfires elsewhere. What does that say to you about how unprepared these countries are for the consequences of climate change?
Well, you're quite right. These are the impacts of climate change, and scientists have been warning for a long time that this is what we should expect. Increases in heat, increases in heavy rainfall, and even the richest countries in the world are having difficulty dealing with the impacts. I think when we've added all up the damage, it'll be tens of billions of euros worth of damage, and hundreds of people will have died. And so this is a part of the world where they're used to dealing with flooding, but the intensity of the rainfall was so great. Some places had the equivalent of 3 months of rainfall in just 24 hours, that it happened on such a scale and so quickly that it caught many by surprise, and hence we have a large number of deaths. So it's true that nobody is safe. There is no part of the world that is going to be spared the impacts of climate change. Even the rich countries are going to be affected, but of course, the most vulnerable of all are those people living in the poor countries, and we need to do far more to help them prepare for these impacts, because they're going to carry on for at least the next 3 decades. They're going to get worse and worse.
Yeah, certainly we seem to be hearing more and more about these, once in a 100-year floods coming almost every year, it seems like. The German Chancellor, as I mentioned, toured some of the sites of the floods today and said we must hurry in the fight against climate change. But, I mean, given all the inaction we've seen from the world's largest economy so far, do you think much will change? And what action does need to be taken?
Well, climate change will only stop when we reduce the global greenhouse gas emissions effectively to zero. At the moment, we're pumping almost 60 billion tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere every year. Some countries now, and many countries, have signed up to reducing their emissions to zero by about middle of this century. But frankly, it's going to get worse until we get to that zero. So we need every country now to pledge to get to zero and to get on with doing it. But in the meantime, and over for the next 3 decades, while these impacts get worse, we're going to have to adapt, make ourselves more resilient. That means building in a much more smart way. We're going to have to move people away from high-risk zones, including low-lying coastal areas, and of course, people living on the edges of rivers that are prone to these kinds of floods.
Yeah, you talk about changes that we'll see over the next few decades. What is in store for us? What can we expect down the road if inaction continues?
Well, the impacts are happening all around us, and we're seeing it. Heat waves are increasing in intensity and frequency around the world. We're seeing heavier rainfall in many parts of the world. A warm atmosphere holds more moisture, so when it rains, it rains more heavily. You're seeing bigger impacts along coasts. We've got sea level rise that's occurring, and storms are getting stronger. Some parts of the world are experiencing more droughts, and in places where there is already shortages of food, that could lead to famine. These are all the impacts that we know are coming. They're getting worse. They're going to carry on getting worse, and we're going to have to learn to deal with them.
Yeah, it's certainly a grim outlook. Bob Ward joining us from London. Thank you.